Save the Stub.
Hi, and welcome to week 2 of Save the Stub. Thank you for tuning in. This week I'm joined yet again by my 2 co-hosts, Rory McNair.
How you doing, Harry?
Hi, mate. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for some quality film discussion.
That's the spirit. And also the novice mind of Will Foster.
2 weeks in a row. Hi, Harry. How are you?
We get to 5 weeks, and I'll count you as a semi-professional, and then we'll be absolutely fine.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I need a medal or something.
And this week we are looking primarily at the new release One Night in Miami on Amazon Prime. It's a film focusing on a fictional discussion about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, featuring key figures such as Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. So, shall we get into it?
Let's go.
Film of the week.
So this week we watched One Night in Miami, which came out last year and is a film focused around the 1960s civil rights movement in America. It's mostly about a fictional conversation between 4 quite big icons at the time. So you've got Malcolm X, obviously what everyone will know, Cassius Clay, later to be renamed Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, who is one of the best American football players of all time, really, and Sam Cooke, who, for me, and I know for a couple of you guys as well, was probably the least known of the 4 men as a famous musician at the time. What did you think of the film, Will? First impressions?
Yeah, so it's difficult for me to say that it was an out-and-out good film or great film. I think, firstly, we need to acknowledge the concept. It's a really interesting concept. And one thing we all talked about before we recorded, well, me and Rory did, was this actually being a play. So this was in theatres quite some time ago, written by a guy called Kent Powers. Interestingly, this film links quite heavily to what we did last week, which, if you've listened to the episode, is quite surprising. So Kent Powers co-wrote the script for Soul, which was the Pixar film that we watched last week.
Oh, did it? I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, and he wrote the play One Night in Miami, of what this film is based on. So yeah, interesting link straight away there. But having not known that, and then kind of realising that after I'd watched the film, that it was originally for theatres, I think it's quite easy to tell that was the case, just because of the concept. So a lot of the film takes place in one room or in a hotel. And I don't know if that helped or hindered kind of the production, to be honest. But yeah, like I said, acknowledge the concept. It's loosely fictional, isn't it, guys? But actually these people all did know each other in real life, and they were friends.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird one, because watching it, you can immediately tell that this is something that would be suited really well to sort of a stage performance. Like, you could see this entire thing played out in one room over the course of a couple of hours, and that makes sense. But I feel like if you're going to bring it into cinema, you've almost got to take the artistic liberty of, you've got more scope to work with. So yes, a lot of it's set in this hotel room, essentially, which isn't a spoiler or anything. But it doesn't really... It's not a good vehicle for you to really watch a film through, I don't think. And there are occasional bits where they do go outside, or there's scenes that aren't entirely separate in this sort of motel complex. But it doesn't fit an interesting film experience to me, especially given the characters and the frame of mind and the timing that they're sort of trying to work with throughout the film. And given, without saying any spoilers, the ending sort of 2 minutes, where they sort of explore quite a lot of the consequences of actions from that night, et cetera, et cetera. Rory, what were your thoughts?
I think it's interesting that you say the word spoilers, because I feel like it would be really hard to spoil this film. I kind of found, like we were saying, more suited to a theatre production. I feel like modern audiences, this is the kind of content that's more suited to a documentary. I think it's generally quite hard with biopics and kind of like true to life character films for me to hit them spot on, especially with 4 characters like that. I felt kind of throughout, it felt a little bit forced and a little bit like 4 guys kind of cosplaying civil rights heroes. But then
not to diminish their achievements or anything, but
no. Well, that's the thing. Like, they are icons, and you have to respect those achievements. But I feel like it would be more compelling if I was hearing it either from them. I know 3 of them have passed now, or from kind of people who knew them, people who were in the same kind of circle. But I did enjoy the film. I thought it was interesting. I think the kind of conversations they were having need to be had and need to be heard by the whole world, which is why they've become so kind of iconic.
I think that was kind of what Regina King, the director, who is an actor that I really am a fan of anyway. She's from a TV show, one of my favorite ever TV shows called Southland from back in the early 2000s. I think that is what she was going for, the core principle. But I also think that given that this is entirely fictionalized, but plays with real characters who were aware of these situations, blah, 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 it's almost kind of harder to have an empathy or an inside take on what they're saying, because I can't believe the conversations to be entirely true. Like, I think it's all really well acted. I think Leslie Odom and Kingsley Benadir as Malcolm X and Sam Cooke are so good. Honestly, I think they're really well cast. Leslie Odom can sing really well. He does it in Hamilton, he does it again in this. But I don't know if I sort of 100% believe the authenticity of what they're saying to one another. Like, they might have said that. I can't say they wouldn't have. But when it's entirely fictionalized, you can't have that sort of biopic, this is a true story, slapped on it for people to really think, well, that hits home. And that sort of, I don't know, diminished it a little bit for me, which I think seems harsh, because there probably are real conclusions that Ken Powers has come to, but it doesn't feel for me like I was entirely watching something that is based entirely in fact.
Yeah, I think why I would love to have seen this in theatres and why I think it's so suited for theatres is because I'm quite a novice of going to like a theatre. I don't really do it much, but I tried to more recently. And when you're there and the actors are in the same room as you get such a sense of emotion and tension between them on stage that it's really quite powerful. So you can really get into dialogue, and kind of, because the nature of a theatre is the set's kind of fixed, right? They can't change what's going on in the background, and you're sat in one seat, so you can't, change perspective or camera angles. It's really about that relationship between actors, and I think I agree with you, Harry. The acting was really pretty good, and I was impressed. But I saw online a lot of criticism, or not a lot, but one of the main criticisms was some of the dialogue was just a bit too long. Some of the conversations I felt were a bit more difficult to listen to than others. I think in the really intense moments when, Malcolm X is really, really upset and he's trying to get across a message, the acting was superb. Agreed with that. And similar with Sam Cooke, because, Sam is the character that probably clashes most with the others in terms of his views are more different, particularly to Malcolm's, than the other two. And because of that, we got to see a bit more of a dynamic acting performance from those two actors. But the other two, were kind of a bit more in the middle. And although they were well acted, I think at points that kind of let their characters down a little bit, because John Brown was quite a reserved character, I thought, in the film. And he was kind of one that was a bit more of a peacemaker and a bit more on the fence, kind of seeing both sides. And Muhammad Ali, his character was, a bit more jokey and jovial, but had less serious moments in it, I thought. And but overall the acting was great. I just think some of the script or the dialogue they were given at times was a bit limited.
I mean, Rory, would you go so far as to say that this film was actually sort of an emotionally powerful film? Because I think there are scenes where first 10 minutes, I'll be dead honest, I was straight up bored. Some of the script was really badly and clunky. But then there's one particular line in the first scene with Jim Brown that everyone who's seen the film will know I'm talking about. That is really impactful. And you sort of had like a sickening sense that it was coming, but you didn't want to expect it. And there were moments like that in the film, again, with Sam Cooke and Malcolm X clashing, and the final scene where Sam Cooke's on that talk show and there's sort of a brief recounting of history from that point on, were powerful. But a lot of the middle part for me especially was sort of meandering. It was a little bit like filler for a few main big plot points.
I think it was a powerful film. I think emotionally, it did grab me once it got going. I agree. I think the kind of first half an hour for me, I was like, it established the characters and I was kind of like, where is it going to go? Is it going to be a kind of black and white plot where we see certain events and kind of things happen and that lead to consequences? Or is it going to be a kind of, here are your characters, and then what we kind of get, which is basically just like an hour and a half of conversation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think, like we've said, in theatres, that can work. Dialogue heavy stuff can be made to kind of be impactful if it's put in the right surroundings. I think there are moments that it came off. I think the kind of condensed nature of what this film was trying to get across, or how the film was trying to get things across, had its good moments, had its bad moments. I think I liked the scene on the roof of the hotel. I thought that was quite good. Quite kind of, I know it's just them moving around in the space, which again, when it comes to theatre, is something that's quite important. But I thought it kind of kept things going and kept me engaged, which worked well.
Yeah, what I will say, Harry alluded to it earlier, there were moments when they did kind of like leave the room and they were in different locations. And I think that was needed. I think this film just about kept me interested in terms of keeping them on the move and not exactly in the same place. I think Cassius Clay and Sam Cooke, when they went to the liquor store, firstly, I think that scene looked really good. All the lighting and the way they shot that was really interesting and nice. And the rooftop scene for me was another highlight. I think it was a bit more candid. We had a moment of real tension on the roof, and that was kind of broken by a bit more of a jokey relationship between all the characters, which was nice, and I think that helped as well.
I think one thing that was done fantastically well with the direction of the film was the kind of sense of danger you got when it came to Malcolm X, and like his kind of experience in his surroundings. Because I think the whole film, he was like, you could sense he was kind of on edge and a bit uncertain of how safe he was. Obviously, coming from me, like we're all quite kind of detached from like the 60s civil rights movement in America, and our kind of age, I think. But one thing obviously I did know about Malcolm X was how he died and the fact he was like assassinated. And I think it was similar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but the fact that he was kind of constantly in danger, and it got to the point where he was kind of constantly under threat, especially at places like hotels when he was staying at places to give talks. The whole film, I kind of thought, is something terrible going to happen at this hotel? And the scene where he kind of goes outside to make that phone call, but kind of looks around, and there's just like an air to the film that makes you really on edge. Yeah,
it's like a constant reminder of why we're watching this film and why the film exists in the first place. I agree that constant reminder was good, and it was also quite necessary, I think, for the film to be shot as it was.
Because production value wise, this film does look good. It looks like a 60s period piece, and I think they probably helped themselves by having so few scenes outside of that hotel room that they've actually got to spend, because there's all the things about, you got to get period era cars, costumes, you've got to make the hotels and the buildings look right. And they do, obviously effort was put into those, which makes it look good and looks authentic. But then my issue sort of came with a degree of artistic liberties taken, because again, it comes back to this point for me of, you're trying to make this film empathetic and impactful, whilst also accepting that you have not trivialized, fictionalized some of the facts to a degree. But then when sort of the timeline doesn't add up, because there's things about Sam Cooke dies fairly soon after this film's set and things like that. This is all set around a fight that Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, did actually have in real life. So the timeline's all a little bit all over the place as well. So again, there I was sort of watching and thinking, am I supposed to believe this entirely as true, or am I watching this as if it's a fictionalized account that would have happened but didn't happen but could have happened? And I don't know, it just sort of, it took me out a little bit when I realised that it didn't all sort of fit together as it should historically, and almost should be a case of they weren't all in the right place at the right time, rather than, oh no, this actually wasn't a thing that ever really was going to happen, but it might have done in another time, in another world.
I think you kind of have to treat this film like it were a play, in the sense that going into it, you have to give yourself up to the, like you've said, the kind of artistic license, the realities that kind of get blurred with what they need to get their message across. And if you can do that, I think it is a really good film. I think, an hour and 3/4 maybe stretches your attention span when a lot of it is just dialogue you've got to get through, but they are important messages that I think we should appreciate.
Yeah. So Regina King, guys, this is her first full-length feature film as a director. Just for people listening who don't necessarily know who she is or the significance of this being her first job. Well, obviously, anyone's first directing job as a full-length feature film is pretty important anyway. But yeah, Harry, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Could we elaborate a bit more on who Regina King is?
So, I mean, she is a famous actor in her own right, you know. So the first thing I knew of her being in was this Southland TV show. But even the last couple of years, she's had big roles as other things. You know, there was this series called If Beale Street Could Talk. I'm pretty sure she might even be a co-writer or something on that as well. She was in the Watchmen HBO TV show that came out last year, American Crime. So she's in loads of stuff. So I think she's sort of taken a jump to do some directing, which a lot of the big actors do these days. You know, it's something that is far more accessible than it used to be because it's almost assumed that you could write your own script and produce your own films. And especially if you spend enough time on sets, you at least know what directors are doing. And I'd still say that for a first, you know, it's a heavy topic for a directorial debut, no question. And adapting a play on top of that is hard enough in my mind to translate onto screen. So I would still say she's done a good job, but I still felt that there were too many points in it where it was meandering or was too play-centric for me to think this does really well on screen and this is going to be a film that is successful off its own merit rather than, you know, the individual cast being really good at their roles or it looking really good or anything like that. So I don't know, it's hard for me to gauge overall what I actually feel. I mean, how would you rate this, Will? If you were going to say, I've got to put like a finite level on what I've seen here, what would you be giving this?
So as a rating, I'd probably be going for about 7, mid-7, probably 7.4 to 7.6. But, you know, in terms of what Regina did, when I finished the film, I was kind of thinking, is this like a fairly straightforward first director role, or is it actually quite a difficult thing to do? Because on one hand, you know, that this is already a different art form in the sense that it's been written for theatre and it's probably been quite successful. But then actually having your first full feature film and having to direct that and convert it to screen, that could be quite difficult. I think for me, I don't know if this is valid or not. You guys might have more of an opinion, but I think because we were in one location and we've alluded to it already, the pacing at points was a bit slow. It would have been nice for me if she'd used more tools as a director to kind of keep the viewer a bit more interested, i.e. using a few more experimental camera angles or perspectives when we were in that room. I think as a director, you can probably take that license to make those kind of calls. And, you know, it's her first job in this kind of role. So fair play for keeping it relatively safe and straightforward, because she was ultimately fairly successful. I think that you can't really criticize her for much. But if I had one thing to say, I'd probably like to see that again. And I think that would have really taken the film to another level. You've got a really good topic and subject that you're talking about in the film. The acting was great. So I think to level it up, you know, just the composition could have been slightly better. But yeah, overall mid-7, I think good film, and would recommend people to watch it if they'd not seen it. Okay.
Rory, what do you think? I get the vibe that you're not as high on it.
I struggle. I think if I were to give it a rating, I'd give it somewhere like a 6.4, 6.5. I think, like you mentioned, Harry, it's a hard topic. It's kind of a meaty topic to get into in your directorial debut. And I think now we're seeing a kind of resurgence of the civil rights and social justice movement, especially in America. So I think the message is really important, but I don't know how well this film serves as a kind of continuation of that message. I don't know how relatable. I think a lot of the things, a lot of the conversations are kind of conversations that need to be had and need to be seen by the world to kind of start approaching racism. But I don't know how accessible a film like this is to the modern audience in its form. I think if it were a documentary, it would probably get picked up immediately and kind of become, it would get a little bit more respect maybe, or attention.
Yeah.
If it were a play, I think you miss a lot of the modern audience, especially in a pandemic. There are no playhouses open. But I think it would be more effective and more kind of more compelling. I think it's still a good film, and just for the messages and the characters who I did enjoy seeing, I'd still recommend watching it and still want to watch it. But I think it does fall short in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth the casting on this. Especially, I was reading some of the ways people spoke about it. The main plus point was really how faithful to their characters the cast were. So people were saying Leslie Odom Jr. playing Sam Cooke had his mannerisms and things when he's on stage, down to a T, and was still acting in the same way that he held himself. And even in Kingsley Ben-Adir doing Malcolm X, I felt like he did remind me of Malcolm X in all of the, clips and sound bites I've heard of Malcolm X in the past. Now, I don't know a lot about, I'm an American football fan, but Jim Brown, I don't think I've seen many videos of Jim Brown doing interviews or anything like that. And then Muhammad Ali is, he's Muhammad Ali. You know what the man's like. So I do think you've got to give a certain amount of credit to how good the acting was, even if you can't almost put that down to the quality of the film itself. But I do agree with you. I think it is sort of a middling 6. I wanted to like it. That was the thing. And there were bits where I was like, if you had a film entirely like this, I'd be thinking that is a great film you've made. But there's too much sort of gappy filler between it, where you're either going to lose an audience or lose me, to a point where you've got to do almost another bang, I've got to do a shock scene, or bang, I've got to do something that's, really impactful for me to really think, wow, that was a film that's worth me either seeing again, recommending, telling someone about, past it being a civil rights film that almost gets, this is going to sound awful, but almost gets plaudits just for tackling a topic that most people would shy away from. I don't know. I don't want to say that's a harsh thing to say, but when you approach difficult topics, you are making a conscious decision to be tackling people's prejudices or views on certain topics. So if you're then going to do that, I almost feel like you've got to do such a good and justified job that you've warranted taking the time to approach that topic, rather than I just want to give my take on, any of these sort of cultural movements that are going on. So, I'm not going to consign it down there with the bang average films. I still think it's above that. I think production value, the acting, whatever. But I think there had to be something, I could see it on stage. If this was on stage, I imagine this would, this slap. But just for a film, I think it's a middling 6 at best. Yeah. I think that's as far as you can really go with saying, this is maybe exactly what she set out to direct, but it's still not a groundbreaking film in those respects for me, I wouldn't say.
Maybe I should change my rating, guys. You guys are you slating me here. No, I'll stick to what I said, but probably the 7.4. I agree with what you guys say, and I don't think well, for one, I'm not compelled to rewatch this film anytime soon. And secondly, Rory, I think you're spot on. I think when you come away from this film, and why I probably gave it a bit higher than you guys was, I think the impact it has is good, but it's not necessarily really about the film. It's kind of about the topic that the film talks about. Maybe I let that influence my score giving a bit, but I'm going to stick to it. I think 7.4, just for the fact that it's so direct about discussing civil rights. And I think I don't think we've actually mentioned this when we've talked about the film, but the film is all about kind of how these characters perceive their own struggle with the civil rights movement and how they think they can affect it. And I think that, we said the concept is interesting, but that is the concept. And I think the actors executed that pretty well. And yeah, really interesting idea. But, for theatre, Harry, I'd love to go see it at the theatre if you're up for it. We're probably not going to get that opportunity.
Sorry, Rory, mate, you're not invited. Not my fault. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we are, I guess we are a film podcast, but we are talking about it. Do you know what I mean? It has had that effect that I suppose is desired in starting a conversation, at least for us three who are quite detached from it. So I suppose in that respect, Regina King, you've done a bang up job. But would I watch it again? It's not for me to say.
I think the thing is, you can review or critique this film as a film or as a message or as both. And I kind of understand why, like Will, why you rate it higher, because I think that message is so important that, especially going into the film expecting a message like that, it does a really good job. And kind of opening itself up to dialogue, it does a great job. But if you're being really critical, looking at the kind of directorial aspects of it, trying to kind of quantify how well it does at communicating that message, I think you do start to see things that bring it down.
It's going to do well at the awards though, guys, isn't it? Right, I think.
Do you think? I'm not sure. This is the thing, because normally I would tip these sort of films as they've almost got America is a real guilt complex when it comes to awards. So anything that really plays on heartstrings, especially for things like the Oscars, they nearly always do well. You know, I can think of any of the big, you know, films of the last 10 years that tackle issues of things like racism, slavery, rights for discriminated groups often do well. But I would be interested to see how this does, because it's still down the lower end of things like budgeting and stuff like that. You know, it's not massive name actors. There are some big names, don't get me wrong, but it's not one of the ones where you've got, you know, proper A-listers slapped all over it. And it's an Amazon Prime production rather than sort of an individual production house altogether. And obviously these streaming services, as we discussed last week, are coming more and more into the foreground when it comes to, you know, awards and actual critical acclaim. But I'm not sure. I'd be interested to see. I will be interested to see.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but let's cut this if it's not right, guys. But when I was researching, I don't know if nominations and stuff for awards that are coming up have already been made, but I think a lot of the acting roles had been nominated from what I'd seen. But, you know, again, I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I can see that being what it would get nominations for rather than as a whole production.
Yes, they're mostly things for casting. So you've got Leslie Odom Jr. essentially has been nominated twice. He's got an SAG nomination and a Golden Globe for Sam Cooke. And then you've got one for director for Regina King in the Golden Globes. And then some stuff like for songs and things like that. But in terms of sort of like whole film nominations, which I'm not saying that they're the benchmark you set like a good film by, but, you know, it very much speaks of the film as a whole. If the actors receive the nominations where the film doesn't, the film as a whole hasn't really been nominated for a whole bunch of things. But obviously there's still a lot of time left for that to change and for more nominations and things to come through. But yeah, well, that was One Night in Miami. In the news this week, the main one we've got really is, it's the Mandalorian stuff. So Gina Carano, I don't know what character she plays. She is one of the main characters though, isn't she, who isn't the Mandalorian? Yeah. She's been straight up fired. She's been fired. She's an awful person. She's been an awful person for a while as well. And Lucasfilm have straight up cut her out. You know, she's been posting anti-Semitic stuff all over Instagram, as well as has a history of mocking mask protocols, trans rights, and sharing right-wing propaganda.
Yeah, goodbye. Good.
I mean, are we sad that she's gone? Well, you've seen all the Mandalorian. Is it a big loss?
Yeah, so this is probably a good opportunity to talk about the series in general. It's obviously been widely viewed by a number of people. Firstly, her character is a bit strange. We're introduced to her in the first season, which both of you have watched, so you saw that. She's kind of a friend of the main Mandalorian character, and she helps at certain points in the plot, and she aids him kind of complete his mission, what he's trying to achieve in the series. But I think we can all agree, poorly acted. We're not
she
just
is
saying
one of the worst actresses I think I've ever seen on screen. I actually could not believe that was one of the things that ruined The Mandalorian for me. That people were saying it was so good, and I was watching this woman act, and I was just thinking, she does not know what she is doing, and she's probably getting paid through the nose for it as well.
Yeah. So really stress that we're not obviously just saying this because now she's gone and it makes us look good because we're criticizing her because she's a bad person. But
I didn't like her last week, and then she got fired, which I just thought made it doubly funny.
Yeah. So, Rory, what are your opinions? I've got my own opinion about The Mandalorian. I think it heavily relies on people's nostalgia value to kind of carry it through and make it seem as if it's a really great series. I don't actually think the quality of the acting and the story in particular is really poor, and it lets it down, and it makes it for me impossible to really get behind it as a series. What do you think?
I'm honestly quite shocked at how bad a lot of the acting is in The Mandalorian, because this is like big budget Star Wars content, a lot of excitement behind it, a lot of popularity is going to come from it. And like you said, it seems like the only thing they've really invested in is the fact that it's Star Wars and a few little throwbacks that make you go, oh yeah, look, that's that thing from Star Wars, which is enjoyable. You got to admit, like, I enjoyed watching the Star Wars films and I enjoyed the kind of visuals of The Mandalorian. But when it comes to acting, when it comes to plot, when it comes to even direction at points, it's just not good. And it's tough because it's something I really want to enjoy. Like, the kind of base plot isn't that bad. Like, the Mandalorian character, he's very easy to kind of get excited about. You want to see where the story takes him. But it seems like the director's kind of just decided that each episode he'll go on a different quest, meet a different new character, and at the end of the day, we're in the exact same place where we started.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? What I was almost in disbelief when I'm watching episode to episode.
All these, Mandalorian, The Witcher, all these Avengers spin-offs, they are all just fan service for people who quite like explosions and sci-fi, aren't they, really? Like, you can't someone is always going to watch if you have got a bit of lasers or magic or killing of some description without any blood, because that's all these shows seem to do, is kill people and then change the blood to green, and suddenly it's, you can make it a PG-12 film. They're all rubbish and they've all got awful actors. But as long as you can put together a semblance of like an overarching story to keep people invested, they will just keep watching it. You can honestly just pump it out. She was going to get her own TV show.
Yeah, I saw
there was
that.
Something coming out with her in that was like, it's called like, isn't it called like Agents of the Rebellion or something like that? About or Mercenaries of the Empire, something like that, where it's just her.
She was going to get her own Star Wars spin.
She had a spin-off coming up, and she screwed that over as well. So I don't know how much money she was making with just The Mandalorian, and then was going to make 10 times that again.
There's some serious karma with all of this. I think, like, the laziness of a lot of the stuff in The Mandalorian, the laziness of hiring this terrible actress, the laziness of her own acting has all come back to bite them quite perfectly. But yeah, she's talked her way out of a job very deservingly.
Millions of dollars. Yeah. Congratulations.
The irony is, as well, is that the only good actor they've cast in the whole show is Pedro Pascal. And the man's an emotionless
you can't see his face
with a mask on. What? How much are they spending? And I was like, oh yeah, we're going to doing a mask reveal of Pedro Pascal. I was like, what's the point? The man's not doing any acting. You might as well just it's like the alien in Aliens was played by the janitor who was on set, because he was the only guy tall enough to fit in the alien xenomorph suit and walk around. You don't pay him $10 million because the bloke fits in the suit, because he's not doing any acting. He just walks around in a costume. Yeah. That's for another. But speaking of Pedro Pascal, actually, now this is the bit of news that I'm excited for. Last year, HBO, who, as we know, make banging TV shows, like they just do, they just spend the money to make very good TV shows.
Yeah, we can agree.
Announced that they were making The Last of Us, which is, I'm not biased, but it is the best video game ever made. Yeah, into a TV show, and he has been announced as the lead.
Yeah,
so I mean,
sorry,
yeah. I mean, I'm just sort of happy.
So anyone not familiar with video games, The Last of Us is considered an incredibly good video game.
I mean, it is the sort of story that would translate so well into a TV show. That's the thing. And if HBO are going to spend the money that I assume they're going to spend, it will look sick. It just will look really good. And you've got things like, one of the directors is the same guy who directed Chernobyl, which is probably top 3 TV show I've ever seen. HBO as well. They've also cast Bella Ramsey, who's like, she's sort of like a supporting character in Game of Thrones, but she's in quite a lot of it, isn't she? Towards the final few seasons, she's in loads of the episodes. She's sort of the young, is she a young queen? I can't really remember what they call her.
She's basically like the head of one of the houses. Kind of towards the north. And she kind of steps up quite a lot and becomes this kind of like boss bitch character. It's going to be interesting to see, because I feel like I don't really know her that much as a character. The problem when you get young actors who you see them in one role and you're like, wow, they've got some potential. It's hard to see past that one role. I'm excited about the idea of the film. I think video games turned into films have not done well. You look at stuff like Assassin's Creed recently.
No. Awful.
The problem with that film is that it was just rushed. I think the thing with The Last of Us, I watched a playthrough of the first game. I haven't seen anything about the second game, other than the fact it was kind of weirdly violent.
The second, I'm like halfway through the second game, but I have to stop playing it for periods of time because it's quite like I've got to be locked in to play that game because it's just things trying to hit you, and I can't.
But I think at least that should be a bit harder to rush in the way that it happened with Assassin's Creed. I think the whole kind of like zombie apocalypse plotline, it's established enough in film and TV that they probably know how to go about it.
Yeah.
So hopefully they can approach that in a good way. But I really like Pedro Pascal. I think he's a great actor, and hopefully seeing him be able to express more emotion than we see in The Mandalorian should be really good. Is it Joel, the main character in?
Yeah. So there were a few people in the running for these various spots. So I think Nikolai Coster-Waldau, also of Game of Thrones, was in the running. Although I don't know if he would have fit that great. And then there were a lot of people who were saying it's got to be Hugh Jackman because he looks just like Joel. You know, he looks like Logan without, the Wolverine stuff going on. But I think Pedro Pascal is a pretty good cast. Unfortunately, the person who I thought was the front runner for Ellie, who's the other main character, was Caitlin Dever. I don't know if you ever would have seen anything she's in. Have you seen Booksmart or anything like that? She's a really good actress. She's properly young. She must be younger than us. But she's really, really good. She's really funny, but also does some serious roles really well. So I've seen her in things like Justified, which was sort of a modern day Western that was out a few years ago with some other big actors, Timothy Olyphant, stuff like that. And she was in line to do it. And then for some reason she pulled out. I'm not sure why. She probably got casting clashes or something like that. So I think good starts, to be honest. I'm happy with where this is going. I'd like to see how much they're spending on it because, the last few shows that they've put out on HBO, Euphoria was a lot of money. Westworld is silly money. Game of Thrones obviously spent everything they had on that. But as far as early days, pretty positive. Naughty Dog, the studio that make The Last of Us, are also making an Uncharted film that I am less confident about. I'll be dead honest. I mean, there was an issue early doors because it's Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, so that's two A-listers.
You're not a fan of Tom Holland, are you, Harry?
I don't like Tom Holland, but more funny was Mark Wahlberg refused to grow a moustache for the role.
Oh, is this that film?
Yeah.
I've seen this.
Or wear an artificial one, even though his character has a moustache. How can you take that role and not want to dress as the bloke you're playing? I just could not.
I mean, the guy's weird, isn't he? Anyway.
Honestly, the idea of a video game film with Mark Wahlberg in does sound like a recipe for disaster.
Oh yeah, it sounds awful. It sounds like, what was that film he was in? Is it The Happening? It sounds like that all over again to me. That's what I'm getting the vibe for. And then Tom Holland does not fit the bill of a 40-year-old man, which is who he's playing.
Interesting.
I think they're doing like a prequel or something like, how we met each other sort of thing, which isn't why people like the game. Otherwise they would have bought a prequel, wouldn't they? Silly
I think
blokes.
the idea of Uncharted is very similar to Lara Croft. And to be fair, those Lara Croft films, they're so bad that they're good in that way.
Oh, I didn't see any of them.
I've not seen them.
I mean, Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft doing a fake British accent is... And then you've got a lot of kind of comedy side characters. It's the kind of thing that you watch in the middle of the summer holidays. You've got nothing to do. But by the end of it, you're like, that basically felt like playing a video game. But I enjoyed it for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, well, I mean, the new ones, like Alicia Vikander, I think her name is, was in those.
I haven't seen the new Tomb Raider,
I don't know where they've gone. I think they make two. I have a weird feeling there's two of them. Or maybe I'm thinking of the video games now. I don't know.
I think with Uncharted, it's similar. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think I just don't see it being the most compelling thing to watch.
Yeah. So the verdict is stay away from Uncharted, but keep an eye out for The Last of Us, is what I'm saying. I reckon I honestly, I'm excited for that. I think that could be unbelievably good.
Do you know, when I was researching this, just to wrap this segment up, well, there was one fact that stood out to me more than anything else, and it's the fact that Bella Ramsey, who's going to play the other lead role apart from Pedro Pascal, she's 5'1", according to IMDb, which I think is incredibly short for a supposed 17-year-old. But we're yet to see how that translates onto screen.
So you're having a go at this international superstar because she's too short for a 17-year-old.
Dude, 5'1". Did you not hear me? That is.
I mean, how tall's Pedro Pascal? What if he's like 5'5"? We just didn't know. Maybe the Mandalorian's been on a box for every single scene he's shot so far.
Perspective. It's all about perspective, guys.
Vince, they just edit his face in like Iron Man. Like,
yeah,
it's not actually his body.
And they don't even need to. He doesn't do any acting. They've actually probably just got some stunt double, and they said they've got Pedro Pascal, and he's never actually done a single scene as the Mandalorian. It's like Tom Cruise playing Jack Reacher, who's supposed to be 6'4". So every scene Tom Cruise is in, he's standing on a stepladder so that he can be the same height as these bullies. And it makes no sense because you see him walking around like a diner at the same height as like a doorknob. And then suddenly he's 6 foot above it, standing over with this absolutely jacked dude. Oh, okay then. Thanks,
Good
Tom.
old Tom. Good old Tom.
Something else as well. I want to see what you two think about this. This Snyder cut of the Justice League, I don't know how long they've been producing it. It feels like the whole of lockdown this has been coming. I've seen about 70 trailers, and yet he said this was the first official one, which didn't make any sense to me either. Have you seen the original Justice League, like the one that came out 3 years ago?
No, so I haven't.
I would genuinely say, one of the worst films I've ever seen. It was awful, like really, really, really bad. And yet they're putting it out again. They spent, I can't remember how much money it was, silly, to let Zack Snyder come back and finish it. And he's just memeing on people. I mean, he got Joker to say we live in a society. Like, he knows that's a joke, and he's put that in his film. I mean,
so for a bit of context, Harry, kind of what's the significance of this film coming back? Because we've already said that it was an awful first release.
Yeah.
What's kind of happened since then to get a
long story short? This is HBO as well, actually, who are taking this. So it's going out on HBO Max, their streaming service. Warner Brothers, who own the right to DC and the Justice League, produced a Justice League film that was being directed by Zack Snyder. However, I think he had personal issues or something, and he ended up leaving production halfway through, and they handed it off to Joss Whedon, who is of the Avengers. Is that? Oh no, is that the Russos? I can't remember. Joss Whedon's done something famous. He's a big director. Anyway, right. He came in, put it out. It was rubbish. It made no sense. I don't even know. I've run out of superlatives to describe this film because it just didn't work. Nothing about it is right. It looks bad. The story's bad. The acting's bad. The characters are all over the place. Some of the CGI as well. They spent something like $20 million removing in post-production Henry Cavill's moustache for another film. Yeah, and it doesn't look right.
So one of the actors was doing another role at the same time, and that actor needed a moustache, and they decided he can keep it and we'll just try and remove it in post, all of it.
But the maddest thing is, in post, the hardest two things to animate about the human face are the eyes and the mouth, because the mouth has all these issues of anytime you make any sort of movement with your mouth, there could be anything, it could be even breathing. Your pores and your skin move around the mouth, and they don't move in a way that you sort of can animate really easily unless you've got facial tracking. And it's the same with the eyes. So when it comes to animate the top of his mouth, they don't even have a frame of reference to go by because the moustache is covering what he would be saying. But they didn't go back and take samples of other things Henry Cavill's done, and they didn't get him in to just shoot the same scenes and then paste his face on. They just said, we'll
give it a go.
We'll airbrush it, and it looks awful. Anyway, this film came out, it sucked. Everyone came down on it really hard. And then one random fan wrote online, like, release the Snyder cut, as in Zack Snyder, the original director. This hashtag was trending for ages. And then I think Warner Brothers was sort of like, we've screwed this franchise so hard after all the money we've put in, we might as well see if we can get him to do the full film again. So it's coming out as a 5-hour series, 5 one-hour episodes instead of a film. It's got a lot more stuff in it that it didn't have originally. So they've recast all of the villain antagonist element. They've reanimated all of that as well because it didn't look good. They've got the Joker from Suicide Squad in, so Jared Leto's in this, even though he wasn't in the first one that came out. They've got all these love interests and all this other stuff that wasn't in the original film. I think they've cut out quite a lot of the rubbish comedy that was in it because there was a lot of like, good chat sort of comedy that was just, I don't know, it didn't make, they'd be literally really dying good, and then Batman would make like a quip and it'd be, what are you doing, cuz? Just lock in. Do you know what I mean? and it wasn't good. So, I mean, have you seen the trailer? The trailer looks cool, but I think every trailer looks cool. Do you know what I mean? You just put some nice music on it and some action, and you're going to like it.
No, I haven't seen the trailer, but, for everything that we've just talked about, this is an interesting film, to say the least. It's kind of been as a direct call of viewers, which is interesting. Don't normally see that kind of thing, I think, in the film industry. And because the first one was so awful, there's quite a big expectation that this one's going to be a lot better. Some kind of cult following for Zack Snyder. I think people think this is going to be some incredible release. Obviously, it's not come out yet, so that's where the big expectation comes from with this one.
Yeah,
we were talking last week about like film trends going forward, and I feel like it would be quite fitting if this film was like the last hurrah of the superhero films.
I'd love it to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you bothered in the sense that you would go and, say this was coming out in the cinemas, would you go and watch this? Are you intrigued enough now that you would?
My problem with these, and it's like quite a kind of basic level problem, is that I never got started up again when Henry Cavill was Superman. So for all the DC stuff, I basically I'm really out of the loop. So I feel like if I were to watch Justice League, I'd need to watch, Man of Steel, Superman?
Man of Steel, and then there was
Batman
another bad film, Batman vs Superman. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I need to kind of catch up with all of them before I can get into it, which I kind of should get around to doing. But you hear reviews for each of them and you're kind of like, it's not quite enough to convince me that it's worth it.
Yeah. Honestly, shocking. The thing was with DC, I've seen all these films because they've taken so long to pump them out, but none of them were any good. So I wasn't going to Justice League thinking, oh, this is, the last hurrah. Because at least with the Marvel films, a couple of them are all right. Do you know what I mean? Thor Ragnarok was a really good film. I'll straight up say that. It was a really good Marvel film. Or even a couple of the other ones, I was at least like, the protagonist is mildly interesting, or I don't mind this plot, or they put in the effort. But the DC ones are so bad. So I'm quite interested. I mean, I think Zack Snyder's gone balls to the wall when he just said, I'm just going to make a film I want to make and see if people like it. I'd quite like, though, this to set a precedent of if fans really didn't like something, production houses putting the effort to redo it. Because I sort of rate that from Warner Brothers. They're typically a studio wouldn't do that either.
We saw it with that Sonic film, didn't we? I don't know if this is a topic for another day, but yeah, this happened with that Sonic film. So I don't know. It's out, isn't it? It came out a while ago.
And there's a second one coming out. It was good enough that they're getting a sequel.
So what happened was, like, the animation of Sonic, who's a fictional hedgehog, was like terrible when they released the trailers for it. They just got it wrong. They just got the shape of the face, the character, just completely wrong. And it was kind of what the situation, like, what are you guys doing? And it led the production house, whoever it was, I don't know, to be honest.
It's just Paramount. It's another big one.
Yeah, Paramount. So yeah, massive production house. They just decided, okay, people have said that this is not good enough, and they just reanimated the whole thing. And from what I understand, it was actually quite successful, as we've heard. They're now going to get a second one. So yeah, interesting.
So yeah, that's the news. That's quite, news.
So it is time for the mailbag, the weekly Save the Stub mailbag. Obviously, over on our Instagram at Save the Stub, we let you ask your questions. Starting off, we have a question from Rachel, who asks, just started rewatching Band of Brothers. How do you rate it? Either of you keen to jump on that one?
Have you seen it, Will?
I have not.
Okay, I'll do it then.
Go for it.
Band of Brothers is good, to be fair. It's like, if you saw Saving Private Ryan and like that, is that in a TV show? But actually, I think it might even have better production value.
I agree.
Band of Brothers was, I think it was IMDb's like top-rated TV show for ages, and still until bloody David Attenborough and his Planet Earth came in, bastard. And they are good. It's just like a war film that goes on, and the cast is mad. You've got random people doing like minor roles, like David Schwimmer turns up. Yeah, Michael Fassbender. I think Orlando Bloom knocks about in it as well. There's all these random A-list actors who just weren't doing anything at the time, so fancy filming a World War II film for a bit. Band of Brothers slaps though. I think that's right, isn't it?
In my head, Band of Brothers was like the first TV box set that I owned. It's like a mini series, right? But
Yeah.
it's the first thing that I bought and like went through each disc wanting to watch it. But like, no, it's great. I think it balances the reality of the Second World War, the history of it. I think it's quite like informative as well, but also like the emotion of all the characters. Such good acting, balancing action with emotion, all round. Just a great series. Like big name actors as well, but they don't shy away of kind of focusing on the little guys. And
it is spread about, isn't it?
Important story as well. Really good pacing to it. I think I rewatched it last year in the space of like a week. It's interesting looking now because I think miniseries are becoming a bit of a thing. Kind of like you get anthology series at least, but I really like how Band of Brothers did it at the start.
Yeah, I mean, it's just if you like your war films, you will not go wrong with Band of Brothers. It's the higher echelon of what you're getting from any of these war things. I'd thoroughly recommend it.
So for people that want to watch it, how many series have we got of it? Is it long?
It's one series. It's one anthology. I think it's only about 8 to 10 episodes, something like that. I think they're an hour each. There's quite a diverse range of areas as well. You know, you start in a training camp. It ends. Actually, I won't say what happens in the other ones, but you go all over the place. You don't follow the same people for more than maybe a couple of episodes, do you?
No, see, the whole thing follows Easy Company. It's like one kind of big platoon, not platoon, it's like bigger than a company. But you see a like big diversity of characters, and you kind of get characters at the start who come in at the end, who kind of, they've changed a lot, and that adds a bit to the narrative. But I think the whole thing never blows itself out of proportion. It's really focused, concentrated, and yeah, it's just great TV.
Yeah. So Rachel, Certi banger. We've given it the approval stamp.
Right. Moving on to our next question. Who are some of your most overrated and underrated actors of the last decade?
Oh, I was doing a thing yesterday on underrated actors. I was reading. Jake Gyllenhaal has never received an Oscar nomination as a lead actor. Now, Jake Gyllenhaal is a good actor.
How did Nightcrawler not get an Oscar nomination?
Do you know what I mean? Nightcrawler. Have you seen Nightcrawler, Will?
I haven't, no.
Oh, thoroughly. What a film. Great film. It's
Nightcrawler's one of those films that, like, I think it's on Netflix. If you've got a spare evening this week, just watch it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing where, like, it immediately grabs your attention and you'll finish it and be like, what a great film. Like, that was worth my evening.
It's one of those things where you watch it and you're like, why have I not watched this before?
It's a weird film as well because everyone sort of knows about it. Everyone knows it's good, and yet it doesn't almost receive as many plaudits as it should do. It's kind of a weird one. It is. You will enjoy it though. Well, really good film. I mean, other underrated and overrated actors. Overrated. I mean, there's so many of these, especially this superhero genre. Like things like, I actually think people like Johnny Depp, most bang average actors. You know, there are these posts all the time on Instagram that are things like, how has Johnny Depp not won an Oscar? I'm thinking, well, what has the man actually done that I was thinking that's sick? You're not giving it Jack Sparrow an Oscar. I'll tell you that. Edward Scissorhands is not getting an Oscar. Sweeney Todd is not getting an Oscar. Willy Wonka's not getting an Oscar. So where's this man getting nominations from? You know,
I enjoyed Pirates of the Caribbean, but I don't think he's like award-winning worthy. I agree with Jake Gyllenhaal as well. I'm just looking through some of the things we reviewed in the past like year and a bit, and End of Watch is another great film. Yeah, like that's tough. That's like tough watching, but it's tough acting that kind of meets the standard. I don't understand how you don't win an award for that, or at least get nominated.
I think the film industry is like many others, like music and things that are similar. People are largely successful due to, but it's not luck, but you know, getting a break in something and they get exposed, and all of a sudden you're kind of in that sphere of I'm a big actor or I've been in big films, and you're kind of a lot more likely to get cast and things. And you know, all kind of media and kind of the arts are very much open to that, I think. And yeah, it's as being someone that doesn't know a lot about films, I can still recognize that there's going to be loads of actors that are really big in Hollywood that aren't necessarily the best. I mean,
what I've been really enjoying is Matthew McConaughey, I think like he's probably properly rated. I don't know if he's overrated, but
yeah, he's a weird one, isn't he? Because when it was sort of the era of failure to launch and rom-coms, everyone looked at Matthew McConaughey as absolute chump work. And then he went and did sort of Interstellar, and then off the back of that has done things like True Detective. And now he's, revered.
Just finished True Detective that first season and loved Matthew McConaughey. Thought he was so good.
Really good.
One name that's come up is Robert Pattinson. Do we think underrated, overrated, properly rated?
So this is interesting. If I just jump in again from a less involved person in film, Robert Pattinson, I think everyone knows, broke onto the scene from the Twilight series, and everyone I think has an opinion on Twilight, especially if you're people of our age. But obviously Robert got slated for being in that, and I've never seen it, so I don't actually know if it's a good performance. It's aimed at teens, so I can't imagine that it's like particularly incredible. But he's been cast in things recently, and he's the new Batman, which is quite a big gig, quite a serious role to be undertaking. I saw him in something recently that I was really, really impressed with, and I'm just trying to remember what it was.
Was it Tenet?
It was Tenet, of course it was. I thought he was really good in Tenet. I was really surprised. Obviously, I don't keep track with Robert Pattinson to see him in Tenet, which is an interesting film, by the way. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but his performance in it I thought was really good and probably one of the better parts of that film. What do you guys think?
I'm not going to start discussing that film. Wow.
We don't have to talk about Tenet.
Don't get Harry talking about Tenet.
It's not. We've spoken about this off the podcast. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think though of the actors that I think are actually over or underrated, because a lot of them are actors that I sort of respect or don't, and in that way, I do or don't like them. I have to say, so one of the things overrated, I think Ben Affleck is my bang average actor. I do not get it.
Have you seen Gone Girl?
Yeah. So he's good in that.
We've watched it together.
I feel like, we have, haven't we? I almost feel like he didn't have to do. Rosamund Pike in that is one of the best acting performances I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree.
In my opinion, I think it's a great film, and she is so good in it. But I actually don't think he has to do a ton for it. It's weird. In a weird way, I think he plays who he is in real life.
No, I get that. I think like he can literally just be like a mopey man
who's a bit of a sleaze.
Yeah,
that's just Ben Affleck, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I was a little bit like, fine.
He doesn't need to kind of portray anyone different, really. His character's not the main focus of that.
That's the thing,
film, is it? So
I'm trying to think. There are some other actors as well. People like Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth, I actually think are really good actors, but aren't rated for acting skill so much as they've managed to get jacked in the gym to play Captain America or Thor. Like actually good actors.
Chris Evans, he showed that a little bit in Knives Out. I think he was like a villain, but he was kind of like, he wasn't just a typical like sleazy, angry man villain. He like seemed like he had a bit of a kind of witty edge to him, which I quite liked. I think he's got a bit of range that it would be nice to see a bit more of.
So yeah, there's a few. I'd have to think about it more to really get down to who I think properly over or underrated. A lot of the big ones I really don't think much of altogether.
We can come back next episode with some underrated and overrated actors.
I'll get back to you.
Final question of the mailbag. What is the main reason you watch films? This is a big overarching question, but
existential.
No, it gives us a bit of kind of purpose on this podcast to talk about heading into each week. Why do we head to the TV screen?
I mean, Will, why? Because I think your take would probably be the most interesting, given that you've sort of started showing this interest more so recently than you had done before.
Yeah, so this can get really deep, can't it, guys? Wow, this is quite a heavy.
Yeah, keep it light.
This is a really quite heavy question. I think, this is going to be different for lots of different people, which is, Harry, you're right. Why it might be interesting. We all have a different opinion, but in general, the older I've got, the more I've got into kind of going to museums, going to see art, listening to more different types of music. And I kind of, they're both laughing at me. Look at you.
Well, I don't know how often you're at a museum, mate. I don't know how you say it.
At the moment, what I mean is if you go on holiday, typical everyone likes to fucking just
Not
go
gonna
on
hold
the
over
piss.
you.
I think the older I get, like the more I'm coming to appreciate different things in life, and that ties into films. Come on, let's get over the wishy-washy stuff. Art's a really interesting concept that they're all designed to make you feel different things. And I think particularly in the pandemic where you can't really do much else and you're almost going on this little journey of self-exploration, and you very much have to be comfortable with yourself and your own thoughts. I think watching TV and films is a bit of an escape where you kind of don't have to focus so much on yourself, or you can rely on something else to make you feel certain emotions. And that's why we have loads of different genres of films. We've got comedies and romantic films and films that are about hardship
and rom-coms and loads of it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you can watch something and it can really change your perception of an event or of yourself in general or of other people within the space of like a few hours. I think that's a really interesting concept. And what films can do is they can basically translate any kind of message or any kind of emotion that whoever's made the film, whoever's acting in it, whatever they want. I think that's a really interesting idea. It's not something I'd really appreciated before. And I think if I'd given the answer maybe a year ago or so, I'd probably just say that I turn on films because I don't have much else to do. But it's kind of developing into me appreciating it as an art form, which ultimately I think we can agree is what filmmaking is about. Rory, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with everything you just said. I think I enjoy storytelling and kind of seeing how people present stories and messages through film and through kind of acting. It's getting very deep, but like mise en scène, like kind of directorial aspects. And I think kind of seeing other people's lives, whether fictional or non-fictional. Like you said, it's a bit of an escape, but at the same time, you kind of relate to these people a little bit, which is what makes you feel those things. It's entertainment.
I mean, just to relate this back to the film that we watched this week, One Night in Miami, Harry mentioned it. I think that scene with Jim Brown at the start of the film is probably the scene that struck me most in the film, particularly early on. We've all got a knowledge of the struggle for civil rights in America in the 60s. I think most people, even if you're from the UK, we kind of get taught this in school now and stuff. But it's very difficult to appreciate exactly how hard it was and how striking some of the things that were going on in America at that time were. And kind of that, the medium of film, seeing that on screen and hearing the language and seeing Jim's reaction to what's being said, it kind of just brings that all to life. And I think that's a good example of how film can be so much more powerful than just learning things in school or, reading them in books, experiencing things, bringing them into your own living room or into your own thoughts by watching them on screen. I think it's pretty powerful. Harry, what do you think? You're not very good at doing deep things, so I'm interested to see what you got to say.
I'm very emotional. My girlfriends will tell you. For me, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because when I start watching films, I then become invested because I've now watched it and I want to know more about the background, which then means that I find other things that I then want to watch off the back of that, which is how I've got to the point that I am today. And, I don't know how many films I've watched. It's not, it's not a nice number. Do you know what I mean? But
quite a few.
I think, but it's through the best films that I've seen in me can provoke such an emotional response that it is more powerful than a book or a song, or, people have that attachment to music, for example, like in Soul, little callback there.
Okay.
That I don't have. But for me, that is what I get from, an excellent film or a TV show. And it's little things like, if you've seen Blade Runner 2049, it's quite a niche example. There is a scene where Ryan Gosling takes the baseline test for the second time, and looking at the background, how that scene is made. So I'm talking not just your VFX, but how the CG is done, how the music is placed to it, how it's shot to make you feel things like paranoia, and how Ryan Gosling does really subtle things like they'll make him tense his jaw just on his left-hand side and things like that. So you get the sense that he's struggling, even though this man's supposed to be a robot, or he'll swallow at a certain point, or there'll be a pause of like a millisecond, but it's enough for you to subconsciously perceive what that director is trying to tell you. Things like that, to me, I see as being, I just think that's an amazing thing. And if I were a director, my sole objective would be able to create a visceral response in the person watching what I'm making. And that is almost, again, with One Night in Miami, what Regina King has been intending to do. When you get that Jim Brown scene at the start, you get that visceral reaction of how you feel about that scene. Or the music at the end, I got the same thing, watching the stuff about Malcolm X and Sam Cooke singing that song. That's that visceral reaction where that is what saves that film for me. Because otherwise I'm thinking that's a forgettable film. But then you see these certain things that grab you or that you remember, and then you could see them 10 years on and you'd still know why you got that reaction or why you feel that way, or if your reactions change from that point. You know, there's things like, sorry, I'm going on a bit, but Rory and I went and saw a Japanese film in Somerset House in London at the open air cinema. And this is one of my favorite films ever. And like the experience for me of seeing this film on this, you know, massive canvas screen in London in the summer was amazing. But the people I was with, I was fully aware weren't getting that same experience. But that's because for me, film is a much more important thing than it is for them. And that's cool, obviously, and that's fine. But that is why I feel the way I do about film, and almost why I speak about it so sort of passionately, where some people might say I'm not so passionate about other things. So I don't know. That's why I like them. That's why I enjoy film.
I mean, if you're listening to this, you're either fairly interested in films or you're one of our friends that we've...
You're almost definitely a mate that I've asked
insisted
to listen.
that you've
or
got
you're one
watch.
of those people that Harry just said wasn't into the film as much as he was.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Rory, that includes you, doesn't it? But no, it's an interesting point. You know, you're probably into films if you're listening to this. Let's hope anyway, because we're not, you know... We're new at this. We realise we're not the most engaging at times, but
I think that wraps us up nicely.
Don't say that.
Call it. We can cut it out. It's fine. No, but if you're watching this,
Crikey.
I've said it. I think you're probably more interested in films, but it's an interesting debate about finding and kind of realising an interest in the arts, whether that's films or music. If you can find that connection to something that makes you feel emotion, it's just so unbelievably powerful. And if you've not found that yet, you know, go to a concert or go to the theatre when we obviously can. Try and watch a number of different films that are highly rated, because it's a really interesting feeling.
So that was episode 2 of Save the Stub. Thank you guys for listening. Next week we are watching The Matrix. Actually, going back for a little bit of a classic, which is streaming now on Amazon Prime if you fancy watching before the next one comes out. So what's left for me to say is thank you to Will and Rory, and see you guys next week.
Save the Stub.